Okay, the idea for the World Jewish Heritage came out. I'll start again. The idea for World Jewish Heritage started when I took some roots trips to visit the places where my father and mother were born, and that was in Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine. So the idea started to mature over there when I started to see, that we couldn't find the cemeteries because they were developed, in terms of real estate, and actually the tombstones were ground up and used as part of the construction. But the tipping point of the whole thing was when I found out there was a synagogue in Lvov in Ukraine that was part of the World Heritage landmark from the UNESCO, was being destroyed, and it was being developed as a hotel. And then I decided that basically all these sites, simply had no voice, and that something was missing, some kind of an organization. So I decided to, form an organization to help, with this, to advocate for these, heritage sites, that simply had no voice. In every catastrophe that's happened to Jews, whether it was the Spanish Inquisition or the Holocaust, or the immigration from all the Arab countries, they left behind a rich tapestry of synagogues and cemeteries. As a result of neglect, as a result of vandalism, as a result of politics, as a result of other factors, these sites are just being deteriorating, and there's simply no built-in mechanism. When I went to the IDC, we came up with a concept of if we can, attract tourists, to these sites, and if we can help countries, develop these sites, then there would be a economic reason, to maintain these sites, and you do see that in a number of countries, like even Egypt, put in $1 million to develop their, this Rambam synagogue, and simply because they see it as a future tourist attraction, but it's not being done enough. And I think if you take Spain as an example, we just signed a cooperation agreement with Spain, and they gave us in a digital form 1,000 sites, basically most of the Jewish heritage sites in Spain. So now we're going to put that into our platform, and we're going to be able to direct people, whenever they go to visit Spain, to go visit synagogues and mikveh, and all kinds of Jewish heritage sites. And also, we're planning on developing an ebook, that will talk about Spanish quarters, Jewish quarters. So that's basically the model that we anticipate working hand in hand to, build the tourism business in the country. We're hoping to take this model and to take it to Eastern European countries, which have a lot of underdeveloped, heritage assets like Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, and basically show them how everybody, can win and out of this situation, all the local businesses. And after what happened with the Lvov synagogue, I went to IDC, which is the interdisciplinary school in Herzliya, and I, talked to a bunch of kids there, and I said, you guys are smart. Can you, somehow figure out a way of thinking of a concept that will help, as well as, and a technological platform, that will help with this concept. So after giving it some thought, they said, well, why don't we build a UNESCO kind of organization just for world, Jewish heritage. And in terms of the technology, we'll develop a community-based resource project, allowing everybody to volunteer their stories and allowing them to input, and as well as a travel app that will allow people to get to those sites to find out where they are. So it was a whole concept with a technology, with it. I came up with the idea of the World Jewish Heritage Project, after I traveled with my family to where my mother and father were born and grew up. and we visited cemeteries and synagogues and all kinds of heritage sites that were related to my parents' history, especially to my uncle, who went to the Chafetz Chaim Yeshiva and was part of the Bilski partisans and everything else. And I began to see that a lot of the sites were not maintained, and they were very difficult to find. And in fact, the cemetery that was in my mother's hometown, Voranovo, had totally disappeared and had become part of a residential neighborhood. And it was really, kind of devastating to see the tombstones being part of the foundations of the buildings there. They were ground up and used as part of the construction materials. So it was clear that that countries like Belarus or whatever, didn't really look at these sites as a potential tourism and everything else. So I started to think about what could be done. And also, it took about 6 months to plan a trip like that, and there wasn't any one place where I could go to and find everything and plan out the trip like it should be. That was that was how the whole concept came up, and the tipping point of the whole thing was when I heard about the destruction of the synagogue in Lvov, which was a World Heritage Landmark from UNESCO, and Ukraine, obviously didn't do enough to protect, the heritage sites and didn't see any value. So I started thinking about how to, build an organization, that could show Ukraine, what economic benefit, there was in these sites. Israel is a startup country, and the kids, I call them kids or students at the IDC, they're very innovative. So I figured that they would have a very novel approach. And as it turns out, there was a recent program about strengthening, Jewish identity from the Jewish Agency. And one of the recommendations of that program was we needed to have fresh ideas from students, to help strengthen Jewish identity. And as it turned out, we were going in the right direction, way before, they had. I think the urgent need is really to basically to actually start promoting the countries that are really doing a very, very good job at preserving their heritage, like Spain, and working with those countries. And so that we can evolve a model, an economic model, or a cultural model, that we can then share to all the countries that aren't doing such a great job as we find in Eastern Europe. So that's really the crux of the thing. Obviously, once they have an incentive to restore these sites and everything else, we can help push all the tourists, and reward those countries, that are maximizing their efforts, to preserve, Jewish cultural assets. Because every tourist, ends up spending about $1,000 to $2,000 when they go visit. So we're talking about, definitely a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry if you look at it on a very global basis, especially if you think that Spain alone is accounting for $20 to $30 million just of Jewish heritage tourism.